The phone rang at 3:00 a.m. Your father's had a major stroke. ICU. Get here now. I was out the door in 5 minutes, still in my pajama pants with a coat thrown over. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. And I already knew I'd be doing this alone. I called my brother 4 times before he answered. What? Not a question? Irritation? Dad had a stroke. He's in the ICU. You need to get to Memorial. Silence. Then, shit, how bad? Bad enough that they called at 3 a.m. Look, I have investor meetings all week. Critical stuff. I'll try to make it this weekend. Critical stuff. Our father was dying and he had critical stuff. Derek, he's in the ICU. And I have a business to save. You're closer anyway. You've got this. He hung up. I wanted a brother who showed up in crises. He wanted permission to disappear. That's an important distinction. The ICU waiting room at 4 a.m. is fluorescent-lit purgatory. I sat on a plastic chair while doctors explained my father would need months of rehabilitation and likely permanent care. Extensive damage. Limited recovery expected. They kept using words like significant and unfortunately and managing expectations. I nodded, took notes, asked about insurance coverage and facility options and rehabilitation timelines, because someone had to handle it and Derek was 58 years old with critical investor meetings. Mom arrived around 6, driven by a neighbor. I watched her walk through the automatic doors looking small and confused, wearing her coat over her nightgown. Where's your father? She asked me. He's in the ICU, Mom. They're stabilizing him. When can we see him? Soon. The doctor said soon. 10 minutes later. Where's your father? I'd been having weekly phone calls with her for a year. She repeated stories. Forgot we'd talked 2 days ago. Asked the same questions multiple times per conversation. I'd thought she was just getting older. While she slept in the waiting room the next morning, I drove to their house to get insurance documents and medications. The house was too quiet. Dad's office still had his reading glasses on the desk next to a half-finished crossword. I started looking through files for insurance papers and found bank statements instead. Not recent ones. Years of them. Organized in folders by date. Transferred to Derek Mitchell, $100,000. The date was 2 weeks after my wedding. I was 28 that year. Derek was 30. My parents had asked me at the reception if I'd mind them helping Derek start his business since I'd married well. I'd said yes because I wanted to be the good daughter who didn't make problems. $50,000 when he was 35. Business expansion. $75,000 when he was 40. House down payment, $30,000 here. $25,000 there. $15,000. $40,000. 28 years of statements, all organized, all documented. I added them up 3 times because I couldn't believe the number. $800,000. Not approximate, not estimated. $800,000 exactly. Transferred from my parents to my brother over 28 years, while I clipped coupons and worked part-time bookkeeping jobs and said nothing. Because each time they mentioned helping Derek at family dinners, during phone calls, in passing comments, I'd said nothing, which became yes by default, which became permission forever. The most recent statements showed $11,000 total in their accounts. The files included reverse mortgage papers, cashed-out life insurance policies, everything liquidated, everything gone. They'd given him my inheritance, their retirement, their safety net, their future care costs, and I'd spent 28 years being agreeable while they did it. I called Derek from their kitchen. Kinda busy, Carla. You got $800,000 from Mom and Dad. Silence. Long enough that I heard him breathing. They invested in my business? They took a reverse mortgage, cashed out their life insurance. They have $11,000 left, and Dad needs permanent care that costs thousands a month. What do you want me to say? They made their choices. After asking me at my wedding if I minded them helping you since I married well, I said yes once. You took it for 28 years. You kept saying yes? His voice went cold. Every time they told you they were helping me, you said nothing. You knew what was happening and you stayed quiet because being agreeable was easier than having opinions? I wanted to argue, but he was right. You were complicit in your own erasure, Carla. You chose to be invisible. The line went dead. I sat in their kitchen as dawn crept through the windows. The same kitchen where I'd eaten Sunday dinners for decades, smiling and nodding and making myself smaller so no one had to deal with my needs. $800,000 wasn't the problem. The problem was the first time they asked if I minded, I should have said yes, I do mind. The problem was every time after that when they mentioned helping Derek, I should have asked why only him. The problem was I'd spent 28 years believing that not making waves was the same thing as being loved. I wanted their approval. They wanted my resources. That's an important distinction. One I should have made at 28. Derek had been counting on me to keep doing it forever. Stay quiet, stay agreeable, stay invisible while he took everything and called it investment. He wasn't wrong about my complicity. He was just surprised I'd finally noticed. The devastating part wasn't the money. It was realizing I'd done this to myself. Every time I said nothing, I taught them my silence was consent. Every time I agreed to keep peace, I agreed to my own erasure. Some people make themselves invisible to survive difficult families. I'd made myself invisible because I thought that was what good daughters did. And now I was 56, years old, sitting in my parents' kitchen at dawn, holding bank statements that proved the difference between those two things. Between survival and volunteering for your own erasure, I'd been volunteering for 28 years. My brother sent exactly 3 texts in 4 weeks. Swamped with work. Things are crazy here. You've got this. Meanwhile, my father was in a hospital bed recovering from a major stroke, and my mother couldn't remember what year it was. But Derek had investor meetings. Always investor meetings. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. And I spent those 4 weeks managing everything alone, while my 58-year-old brother sent Lai quotes disguised as excuses. Mom couldn't stay in the house anymore. Not safely. I moved her into my spare bedroom temporarily and discovered just how bad things had gotten. She asked me 5 times in one morning where she lived. She kept looking for Dad, asking when he was coming home from work. He retired 12 years ago. The worst part? Sometimes she looked right at me and I could see her trying to place my face. Do I know you? She asked on day 3. Not confused, genuinely asking. I made an appointment with her doctor for the following week. Dr. Harrison reviewed the cognitive assessment results and didn't sugarcoat it. Moderate dementia. Based on the progression markers, I'd estimate this has been developing for at least 2 years. 2 years. I sat there doing the math. 2 years ago, Mom was 75, still living independently, still managing her own affairs, still appearing completely normal to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Her declining judgment would have made her vulnerable during this period. Dr. Harrison continued, to financial manipulation, inappropriate agreements, signing documents she didn't fully understand. The doctor was being clinical. I was being handed a timeline of exactly when my mother stopped being able to protect herself. I called Derek that evening. Yeah, I noticed she seemed a little off last year, he said, but I figured you were handling it. You always handle everything. He noticed. He saw her struggling, and he assumed I'd fix it because that's what I did. Handle things. While he handled investor meetings. Dad's being transferred to Riverside Skilled Nursing, I told him. The rehab team says he'll never fully recover. He needs permanent supervised care. The costs were $6,500 monthly. The doctors were clear this was forever. No getting better. Just managed decline. I'd already researched memory care facilities for Mom. The numbers ranged from $7,000 to $12,000 per month, depending on the level of services required. Combined, at least $13,500 monthly. Every month, for the rest of their lives. I was making $2,400 a month doing part-time bookkeeping. We need to discuss splitting the costs, I said. The facilities won't wait while business is slow right now. Derek's voice went careful, practiced. You should cover it. Richard has a good job. Richard, my husband, who Derek had never asked about, never had a real conversation with, but whose income he apparently tracked with great interest. Derek, this is over. $13,000 a month. Your household can afford it better than mine can right now. The logic was so smooth, so reasonable, as if our parents' care was just another expense to be distributed based on convenience. You received $800,000 from them, I said. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then his voice changed completely. That money was invested in my business years ago. It's not liquid. And besides, they gave it to me freely. You have no right to throw it in my face. Freely. As if my silence had been consent. As if my not fighting back meant I'd agreed. But I'd said yes to keeping the peace when I was 28 and newly married. He'd turned that single yes into permission to take everything for 3 decades. This isn't about throwing anything. I'm not doing this. He hung up. I wanted help. He wanted justification. That's an important distinction. I called Sarah Chen the next day. We'd known each other since high school. She practiced family law now. Can I recover the money he received? I asked. Sarah's answer was gentle but clear. Unless you can prove the money was given under duress or he committed fraud, gifts from parents to adult children are legal. They can't be reclaimed. I knew that. I'd known that. But hearing it confirmed felt like doors slamming shut. However, Sarah continued, if you suspect he's currently taking money from them or misusing any financial access he might have, that's different. That could be investigated. Currently, I pulled out the boxes of financial records I'd been organizing. Bank statements, credit card bills, everything I'd gathered while trying to understand how parents who'd owned their home outright and had pension income were down to $11,000 in savings. The ATM withdrawals caught my attention first. $8,200 in March of last year, $9,400 in May, $6,800 in July, 12 separate transactions over 18 months, each one carefully structured to stay under $10,000. I added them up 3 times, hoping I was wrong. $40,000. My parents didn't use ATMs. Dad's arthritis made the machines difficult, and Mom never liked them. Their regular spending patterns were checks and debit card purchases at the same 3 stores they'd used for years. But these were withdrawals at branches across town. Different days, different amounts, all under the reporting threshold, not random. Deliberate. I called the bank the next morning. I'm Carla Wheeler, I said. I'm calling about my parents' joint checking account, Robert and Patricia Mitchell. The representative pulled up the account. What can I help you with? Can you tell me who has access to this account? Your parents are the primary account holders and... She paused. Derek Mitchell was added as an authorized user approximately 2 years ago. 2 years ago, right when Mom's dementia was starting to affect her judgment. Right when Dad added him to the accounts. Right when $47,000 started disappearing. I called Derek that night. Do you have access to Mom and Dad's bank accounts? I kept my voice neutral. Why are you asking? Immediately defensive. Because I'm managing their finances now and I need to understand. You're paranoid. You're always looking for reasons to make me look bad. Not denial, not explanation. Just attack. Have you been taking money from their accounts recently? You're being cruel. His voice went high, outraged. This is exactly why they never trusted you with, answer the question. I don't have to listen to this. The line went dead. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes. He just ran. That's not innocence. That's strategy. And I'd been watching him deploy it my entire life. While managing all of this, the facilities, the bills, the growing certainty that my brother was stealing from our incapacitated parents, I remembered something. 3 of my bookkeeping clients had mentioned over the past year that their parent companies occasionally needed help with more complex financial analysis. I'd never followed up, because I hadn't done that level of work in 28 years. Because stepping into professional visibility after decades of intentional smallness felt impossible. But impossible was relative. Impossible was $13,500 a month I didn't have. I started reaching out to my small professional network, just mentioning I might be available for consulting projects. The responses were slow, uncertain. Nobody commits to hiring someone who hasn't done real financial work since 1996, but I had to try. The evidence was clear. My brother hadn't just passively accepted help our entire lives. He'd actively stolen from our parents during the exact period when Mom's dementia made her vulnerable and Dad's failing health made him desperate. $47,000 in 18 months, carefully structured, deliberately hidden. I had bank statements, I had dates, I had withdrawal patterns that screamed theft. But I needed more. Because proving financial abuse of elderly parents requires more than suspicious math. It requires proof so undeniable that even people who wanted to believe Derek would have to see the truth. And Derek had spent 58 years building a reputation as the child with potential, the one who deserved investment, the golden son who could do no wrong. I'd spent 56 years being invisible, which meant when this fight became public, nobody was going to believe me just because I showed up with receipts. I needed documentation so complete, so irrefutable, that silence would no longer be mistaken for consent. The facility called on a Tuesday to say my brother hadn't paid his half of the bill. Not that he was late, not that there was a processing delay. He hadn't paid at all. The full $13,500 was due, and only my $6,750 had arrived. My name is Carla Wheeler, I'm 56 years old, and I just spent 3 weeks moving my father from skilled nursing to join my mother in a combined care facility because keeping them apart was costing $15,000 monthly and destroying what little they had left. We sent the invoice to both contacts you provided, the billing coordinator said. Professional, apologetic, but we need the full payment by Friday to avoid late fees. Friday, 3 days away. I'd sent my brother the facility information, the billing contact, payment instructions. I'd even called twice to confirm he received everything. He'd said yes both times, told me he had it handled. Handled. I paid the full amount myself, $13,500 from my checking account that was supposed to last 2 months on my part-time bookkeeping income. Gone in one transaction. My brother called 6 hours later. I was at the grocery store standing in the cereal aisle, trying to figure out which generic brand would stretch furthest, when my phone lit up with his name. I let it go to voicemail. You had no right. His voice was shaking, not with guilt, with rage. No right to put them in that facility without consulting me, without asking what I thought. You just made a unilateral decision and now you expect me to pay for it? I'm not paying for your choices, Carla. I'm not enabling this. Enabling. I wanted partnership in caring for our dying parents. He wanted veto power he'd never have to use because I do the work anyway. That's an important distinction. I stood there holding a box of store-brand cornflakes, listening to my brother scream about rights and choices while our father recovered from a stroke that had left him unable to walk and our mother couldn't remember where she lived. I'd spent 4 weeks trying to discuss options with him. 4 weeks of calls that went to voicemail, texts that got one-word responses, messages through his wife that apparently never reached him. I had documentation, 17 attempted contacts over 28 days, call logs, text screenshots, emails with read receipts. He had outrage. The social worker at the facility called me the following week with what she described as a concern. Your brother visited yesterday, she said. He spent 2 hours in the billing office. Visiting mom and dad? No, just billing. He had very specific questions about their finances. Insurance coverage, whether they'd signed any powers of attorney. We couldn't provide details without proper authorization, and he became confrontational when we explained that. The way she said confrontational made my stomach drop. He wanted to know about their money, I said. He wanted to know everything about their money, down to the penny. She paused. I'm sharing this because his behavior raised some flags. Staff members are trained to watch for financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, and his questions felt more like an audit than family concern. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. My brother had never visited the facility to see our parents, but he'd spent 2 hours interrogating billing staff about their finances, not concerning behavior, strategic reconnaissance. I called an attorney the next morning, not our family lawyer who'd known us both since childhood. A new one, someone who didn't have 20 years of watching my brother be charming and watching me be agreeable. The attorney asked about powers of attorney. I told her my parents had signed them 8 years ago when they were both fully competent. I was named as their agent for both medical and financial decisions. Are those documents still valid? She asked. I think so. They never revoked them. Then yes. With both parents now incapacitated, those POAs are active and enforceable. She paused. You should file them with the facility and their financial institutions immediately. It formalizes your authority and prevents anyone else from claiming decision-making power. We filed everything within 48 hours. I sent my brother a formal letter through my attorney notifying him that I held legal power of attorney for both parents, established years ago when they were competent, and would be managing all medical and financial decisions going forward. His response arrived 6 days later. Not a phone call, not a letter, a court filing, emergency guardianship petition, claiming I'd coerced our vulnerable parents into signing POA documents years ago, that I'd been exploiting them financially, that I'd placed them in substandard care against their wishes. The court scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks later. 3 weeks of my brother calling the facility with complaints. 3 weeks of him showing up unannounced to challenge staff decisions about medication, therapy schedules, meal plans. 3 weeks of the facility director calling me to ask if we could please manage our family conflicts somewhere other than the memory care unit. I wanted to scream that this wasn't conflict. This was warfare. But you don't scream at people who are keeping your parents alive. Midway through the second week, one of my bookkeeping clients mentioned something over coffee. Our parent company needs temporary help with a financial analysis project, she said. 3 months, part-time, $45,000. I told them about you. $45,000. More than I made in 6 months of bookkeeping. I don't know if I'm qualified, I said. You reorganized our entire accounting system and saved us $12,000 annually. You're qualified. She slid a business card across the table. Just think about it. I took the card, held it between my fingers like evidence of something I couldn't quite name. I'd been out of professional work for 28 years. The last time anyone had valued my financial analysis skills, I was 28 and newly married, and my parents were asking if I minded them giving my brother money since I'd married well. I told her I needed to think about it. My 3 adult children called that weekend. Conference call, all of them on the line together. "What's happening?" my oldest daughter asked. "Why is Uncle Derek filing for guardianship?" I tried to explain. The care facility, the unpaid bills, the POA documents. But as I talked, I realized I was explaining logistics, not history. They didn't know about the money their grandparents had given their uncle over the years. They didn't know about the pattern of favoritism. They didn't know any of it because I'd spent their entire lives pretending everything was fine. "Maybe he has a point," my son said. "Maybe you're overwhelmed and not thinking clearly." The words hit like ice water. "What?" "You're working and managing their care, and now this legal stuff. Maybe Uncle Derek's perspective has merit. Maybe you should work together instead of fighting." My son was 30 years old. He'd heard his uncle's version of our family for 3 decades. Heard him talk about supporting our aging parents, about the burden of elder care, about siblings who don't step up. He'd barely heard mine, because I'd never told it. I wanted my children to know me. But I'd been too busy chasing validation from parents who never saw me to let my own kids see who I really was. That's not protection, that's absence. "I'll think about what you said," I told him. I didn't argue, couldn't argue. He was right that I'd hidden too much, just wrong about what that meant. After the call ended, I sat on my couch in the dark and did something I should have done weeks ago. I checked my brother's social media. The campaign had started 3 days after he filed the guardianship petition. Post after post about the burden of supporting aging parents, the financial strain, the emotional toll, the pain of watching siblings who married rich abandon family responsibilities. One post from 2 days ago spent another afternoon handling care decisions alone. Some people get to focus on their careers while others carry the weight of family. Grateful for the people in my life who understand sacrifice. 63 comments, sympathy, support, outrage on his behalf. Not a single post mentioning that he contributed nothing, that he'd visited our parents twice in 3 months, that I'd paid every bill while working part-time because I couldn't afford not to work. Just careful, calculated lies that sounded like truth because they were designed to. I took screenshots. Every post, every comment, every carefully worded piece of fiction. Then I pulled my bank records. 3 years of statements showing $34,000 in payments to the care facility, medical bills, household expenses for our parents. Then I pulled their bank records, the ones I had access to as POA, 18 months of withdrawals, structured amounts under $10,000 each, always the same authorized user, my brother. $47,000, gone. While I was clipping coupons to keep groceries, under $300 monthly, I brought everything to my attorney the next morning, the social media screenshots, the bank records, the documented evidence of who had actually been supporting our parents while my brother was performing sacrifice for an audience. "This is good," she said. "Very good. The court will want to see this." I called my client that afternoon and accepted the consulting contract. Was I terrified? Yes. I hadn't done professional financial analysis in 28 years. I'd spent 3 decades making myself small and invisible and agreeable, but small and invisible hadn't protected me. It had just made me easier to lie about. My brother's attorney sent a letter 2 days later, threatening to subpoena my employment records to prove I was prioritizing my career over my vulnerable parents. I read it twice. Then I filed it with everything else. Some lines, once crossed, don't get uncrossed. And my brother had crossed this one the moment he decided to weaponize the courts against the person actually keeping our parents alive. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. And I was watching my brother's attorney realize he'd walked into a courtroom completely unprepared. The guardianship hearing was supposed to be simple. Derek, my brother, 52, charming, desperate, had filed a petition claiming I coerced our incapacitated parents into signing power of attorney documents and was mismanaging their care. He'd posted about it on social media for weeks. Caring son, fighting cruel sister. The community ate it up. What he didn't know was that I'd kept every receipt. My attorney slid the first exhibit across the table. Complete financial records showing Mr. Mitchell received $800,000 from his parents over 28 years. She paused. Let that number settle. During the same period, Ms. Wheeler received $0 in parental financial support. $800,000. Not rounded for effect. Actual transfers I documented going back to when I was 28 and Derek was 30. $100,000 to start his business. $50,000 when he was 35. $75,000 when he was 40. dozens of smaller amounts that added up to a second mortgage worth of money while I was clipping coupons and working part-time bookkeeping jobs. Ms. Wheeler has personally paid $34,000 toward her parents' care costs over the past 3 years. My attorney continued. Mr. Mitchell's documented contribution is $0. I watched Derek's attorney flip through the bank statements, looking for something to challenge, finding nothing. Additionally, Mr. Mitchell was added as an authorized user to the parents' accounts 2 years ago, when medical records confirm his mother's dementia was already affecting her judgment. My attorney presented the neurologist's notes, dates, cognitive test scores, timeline. In the 18 months following, $47,000 was withdrawn in structured amounts under $10,000. Ms. Wheeler first became aware of these withdrawals 3 months ago. $47,000, while I was paying for their care, while Derek was posting on Facebook about how he was supporting them and I was abandoning them. The judge examined the social media posts my attorney had printed. Derek's face in every photo, arm around Dad, caption about being there for family. The bank records right beside them showing he'd contributed nothing. Stolen, actually. Not contributed. Stolen. The power of attorney documents were executed 8 years ago. My attorney placed the originals on the table. Notarized, witnessed, dated when both my parents were fully competent, before Mom's dementia, before Dad's stroke. The attorney who prepared these documents has provided certification. Both parents underwent capacity assessments at the time of signing. All protocols were followed. Derek's attorney finally spoke. Your Honor, my client was unaware of the extent. Your client posted extensively on social media claiming he was financially supporting his parents. The judge interrupted, while simultaneously withdrawing money from their accounts. That's not lack of awareness. That's fraud. The ruling took 4 minutes. Guardianship petition denied. My power of attorney confirmed as validly established years ago. And then the judge looked at Derek. Mr. Mitchell, I'm deeply concerned about these withdrawals. Ms. Wheeler, you may wish to consult Adult Protective Services about potential financial exploitation. He closed the file. Don't waste this court's time again. Outside the courthouse, Derek caught up to me in the parking lot. You've always been jealous, he said, his voice tight, controlled, of my relationship with them. Now you're punishing me for being their favorite. I'd heard variations of this for 28 years. The golden child narrative, the one with potential. They invested in me because I had potential. Derek continued. You were just competent enough to not need help. That's not my fault. Competent enough to not need help. Not successful enough to deserve investment. Just functional enough to be ignored while $800,000 flowed past me to him. The $47,000, I said. The recent withdrawals. Dad asked me to make those for expenses before the stroke. Derek's face didn't change. Practiced. Smooth. It's none of your business. Dad had his stroke 2 years ago. The withdrawals started after Mom's dementia was already documented. After Dad's health was declining. Derek was claiming authorization from a man who could barely form sentences. I walked to my car. Some conversations don't need responses. The first month of consulting work felt like waking up. Financial analysis for a mid-sized tech company. Budget review. Efficiency audit. The skills I'd used managing household finances for decades, just applied to actual numbers that mattered to people who weren't. My family. I found $200,000 in budget inefficiencies their previous analyst had missed. Redundant software licenses, overpayment on vendor contracts, basic analysis they should have caught but didn't. We're impressed? The company principal told me during my contract review. We'd like to discuss future opportunities when this ends. For the first time in years, people were praising my expertise. Not my helpfulness, not my availability, my actual professional capability. Meanwhile, Derek was filming his children. The video spread fast. His teenage daughter crying about missing her grandparents. His son asking why Aunt Carla made it so hard to visit. Derek's captions were perfect. Forced family separation. Elder abuse concerns. When money matters more than love. The facility director called me on a Tuesday. We're getting questions, concerns from other families about disruption. I sent her the documentation. No visit restrictions had ever been implemented. Derek had unrestricted access during normal visiting hours. The director reviewed it, checked her logs. Mr. Mitchell has visited twice in 2 months, she said quietly. I'll make a note in our records. Twice, while posting daily about being kept from his parents. My daughter texted me the video link that evening. Is this true? 3 words, but I heard the question underneath. Have I been wrong about you? Is Uncle Derek right? My brother was systematically destroying my credibility. Not just with strangers, with my own children. I contacted a reporter who'd covered elder care issues before, offered to speak on the record about financial abuse of elderly parents and burden inequality when one sibling abandons care responsibilities. She wanted documentation. I provided sanitized financial records, court documents from the guardianship hearing, proof of Derek's social media lies compared to actual bank records. I also filed the APS report. $47,000 withdrawn while mom's dementia was progressing and dad's health was failing. Led investigators with subpoena power track where that money went. The facility doctor called that same week. Dad's recovery had stalled, recurring small strokes indicating vascular deterioration. His prognosis had worsened considerably. I added it to the list of things I was handling alone. Then my son called. Derek contacted me, he said. No greeting, straight to it. He said you're having a breakdown, making irrational decisions about Grandma and Grandpa. He asked if I'd noticed any concerning behavior. The air left my lungs. Not just public smear campaigns, not just trying to turn strangers against me. Derek was contacting my children directly, planting seeds, building a narrative where I was unstable, irrational, dangerous. Have you? My son's voice was careful. Noticed anything concerning? I realized what Derek was doing. He wasn't just fighting for guardianship or money. He was isolating me from everyone who might support me, destroying my professional credibility, turning my own children against me, making sure that when I needed someone to believe me, no one would. Systematic, deliberate, desperate, and I was completely alone. The local news ran my interview on Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, and by Wednesday morning, my brother's carefully constructed world started cracking. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. And I just told 12,000 viewers exactly what happens when one sibling abandons elderly parents while the other drowns in $6,500 monthly care costs. The reporter didn't use Derek's name. Didn't have to. She showed the data instead, how common this pattern is, how devastating for families. 83% of elder care falls to one family member. 72% of those caregivers are women. The average financial burden is $34,000 out of pocket over 3 years. I was every single one of those statistics. Within days, people who knew our family started questioning Derek's social media narrative, the one where he was the devoted son supporting our parents financially while his wealthy sister abandoned them. Turns out when you post 47 updates about how much you're sacrificing, but the local news has receipts showing someone else paid for everything, people notice the math doesn't work. Over the next week, 7 of his friends contacted me privately, all with nearly identical messages. I had no idea. I'm sorry I believed him. I should have asked questions. I wanted to feel vindicated. I felt exhausted instead. Because correcting lies shouldn't require investigative journalism and bank statements. But here we were. The consulting contract I'd taken 3 months ago, the one that felt terrifying after 28 years of part-time bookkeeping, ended with my supervisor calling me into her office. We'd like to offer you a permanent position, she said. Financial analyst, $95,000 annually. Triple my bookkeeping income. Nearly triple my worth, apparently. Your analytical skills are exceptional, she continued. All those years managing household finances and small business bookkeeping, that translates directly to corporate financial work. We're lucky to have you. I accepted before my brain could manufacture reasons why I wasn't qualified. And something shifted. Not confidence exactly. More like the beginning of believing I might deserve space in a room. But I'd been taking space from the wrong people for decades. So, Thursday evening, I asked my 3 children to meet me. Sarah, my oldest at 32, Emma, 28, Marcus, 30. All adults now. All strangers to parts of me because I spent their childhoods chasing approval from people who never intended to give it. They sat in my living room looking uncomfortable, like they knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. I need to tell you the complete truth, I said. About the family dynamics, the money, your uncle's lies, and my failures as your mother. Sarah started crying before I finished the second sentence. I didn't sugarcoat it. Not the $800,000 given to Derek over 28 years while I got nothing. Not the $47,000 stolen while Mom and Dad couldn't defend themselves. Not Derek's social media campaign painting me as cruel and selfish. Not the guardianship petition. Not the lawsuit with forged documents. And not my part in it. How I'd been so consumed with being the invisible, perfect daughter that I'd made myself invisible to them too. I always felt like you were distracted, Sarah said, tears streaming. Like you were there, but not really there. I needed you, and you were busy being what Grandma and Grandpa needed instead. Emma's voice was quiet. I stopped calling sophomore year of college. Every conversation was about the grandparents. You never asked about my life. After a while, I figured you didn't want to know. Marcus stared at his hands. I always thought you cared more about being the perfect daughter than being our mother. Uncle Derek used to say you were obsessed with proving yourself to people who didn't care. And I didn't know enough to disagree because I barely knew your side of anything. Each word was a knife I'd sharpened myself. I didn't defend, didn't explain. Just apologized. You're right, all of you. I was so desperate for validation from parents who never saw me that I failed to see you. I'm sorry. And I'm asking if you're willing to work on rebuilding what I broke. They all agreed. But Marcus looked at me with something like pity. It's going to take time, Mom. I nodded. Time was something I couldn't get back. Only forward. Friday morning, Derek showed up at my office. I was reviewing budget reports when my desk phone rang. Security. There was a family emergency in the lobby, and could I come down immediately? I knew before the elevator doors opened. Derek stood in the marble lobby screaming at the receptionist. His face was red, spit flying. 52 years old, having a tantrum in corporate reception because his little sister wouldn't stay in her place anymore. Where is she? He shouted. She can't hide behind. I'm right here. He spun, and I saw it clearly for the first time. Not anger, desperation. The kind that comes from watching everything collapse while someone you used to control succeeds without you. You selfish bitch, he said. Each word meant for maximum impact. Abandoning the family that needs you, chasing a career while Mom and Dad suffer. And then you lie to the media? Destroy my reputation with your Mr. Mitchell. A woman's voice. Sharp, professional. My HR director had materialized with legal counsel. You need to leave immediately. This is between me and my sister. This is trespassing. Security has documented this incident. You're being escorted out now. 2 security guards appeared. Derek looked between them and me. I watched him understand. He had no power here. No narrative to sell, just consequences arriving in real time. They walked him out while he shouted about lawsuits and defamation and making sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. HR and legal kept me in a conference room for 30 minutes. Documented everything, assured me the company takes security threats seriously, implemented visitor restrictions, alerted building security, professional protection. I'd never had that before. That evening my phone buzzed. Derek, you think you've won, but this isn't over. I'm suing you for the cost of care, for defamation, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you really are. Enjoy your little job while it lasts. His behavior had become increasingly erratic over the past weeks. Something was happening in his life that I didn't fully understand yet, but desperation makes people dangerous. Saturday afternoon, I opened a library community room for the first meeting of my support group. Adult children managing elderly parent care while dealing with sibling abandonment. I'd posted about it online expecting maybe 3 people. 12 showed up. 12 people who thought they were alone. I started sharing my story. Got halfway through Dad's stroke and the 3 a.m. phone call before my throat closed. Reliving it out loud hurt worse than I expected. The words felt like shards of glass. I almost stopped, almost said never mind, and sent everyone home. Please keep going. A woman in her 40s, gray roots showing through blonde dye, exhaustion in every line of her face. I've been managing my mother's care alone for 3 years, while my siblings do nothing. Everyone thinks I'm crazy or exaggerating. Hearing your story makes me feel less insane. So I continued, because being seen by strangers who understood was worth the pain of remembering. Monday morning, Adult Protective Services called. We've completed our investigation of the $47,000 in withdrawals, the investigator said. The timing and circumstances are suspicious, but without testimony from your father about whether he authorized the withdrawals, we can't pursue criminal charges. Of course not. Dad couldn't testify. The stroke had taken his voice along with everything else. However, she continued, the money will need to be accounted for in any estate proceedings. Estate proceedings. Because eventually this story would have an ending. Just not the one I'd spent 28 years hoping for. Wednesday afternoon, my boss called me into her office. HR director present, legal counsel present. My stomach dropped before anyone spoke. We've received multiple calls, my boss said carefully. Someone claiming to be concerned about your mental stability and decision-making, suggesting we should reconsider your employment. I watched her face. She wasn't buying it. We wanted to bring this to your attention formally, get ahead of any potential issues. And suddenly I understood with perfect clarity. Derek couldn't control me anymore, couldn't access the parents' money through manipulation, couldn't win in court, couldn't threaten me into compliance. So he was trying to destroy the one thing I'd finally built for myself, my professional life, my financial independence, my escape. Not because he had a strategy, because he was desperate and drowning, and my success made his failures impossible to ignore. Some people don't want you to win. They just can't stand watching you stop losing. I have complete documentation, I told them. Of everything. My boss smiled. We thought you might. My brother called my office 17 times in 3 days. 17. Not texts I could ignore. Not voicemails I could delete. Phone calls to my employer's main line where he identified himself as my brother and claimed there was a family emergency that I was refusing to address. The receptionist started recognizing his voice by day 2. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. And I was sitting in my boss's office with 3 years of documentation spread across her desk, explaining why my brother was trying to destroy my professional reputation. He filed for guardianship of my parents when I was 53, I said, claimed I was coercing them and stealing their money. The judge ruled in my favor after reviewing the power of attorney documents my parents signed 8 years ago when they were fully competent. My brother lost. Margaret, my boss, mid-50s with reading glasses perched on her nose, studied the court documents. And the calls? Retaliation. He can't access their accounts, so he's trying to get me fired. I watched her face. I'd been working here 6 months. Financial analyst position paying $95,000 annually, nearly triple what I'd made doing part-time bookkeeping for decades. I couldn't afford to lose this. The company stands behind you, Margaret said, completely. I'll have our attorney send him a cease and desist. If he contacts this office again, we'll pursue harassment charges. The relief almost knocked me over, but I just nodded. Thank you. I wanted to cry. She wanted me to know I was valued. That's an important distinction. The cease and desist letter went out on a Tuesday. The calls to my office stopped immediately. For 3 days, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe consequences actually worked on people like my brother. Then the lawsuit arrived. Pro se. He was representing himself. The filing claimed I had coerced my incapacitated parents into signing power of attorney documents through undue influence and had systematically stolen money from their accounts for my own benefit. He presented bank statements as evidence showing withdrawals I had allegedly made totaling $47,000 over 18 months. Attached were copies of the bank statements with specific transactions highlighted. Dates, amounts, account numbers. My attorney, Patricia Chen, early 40s and sharper than most people deserved, laid them out on her conference table. These look official. Because they are, I said. Those are my parents' real account numbers. But look at this. She pointed to a highlighted withdrawal. $50 on March 15th. Now look at the certified records from the bank. She pulled out the official documents we'd subpoenaed during the guardianship hearing. March 15th shows $4,200. The amounts had been altered. Not by much. $8,000 instead of $4,000. $1,200 instead of $600? Amounts large enough to seem like theft, but not large enough to trigger automatic bank reporting. The dates are wrong too, Patricia said. He's taken real withdrawals and changed when they occurred to make the pattern look more suspicious. This required someone who understood banking systems well enough to be convincing, but not well enough to avoid detection by experts. Forgery. My brother had committed forgery to sue me for stealing money he had actually stolen himself. We'll file for discovery, Patricia said. His financial records, all of them. Discovery is a beautiful thing when someone has something to hide. The subpoena returned my brother's complete financial records. Patricia spread them across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene, which legally they were. His business declared bankruptcy 24 months ago, she said. Chapter 7. Total loss. The same month he was added to my parents' accounts as an authorized user. His house is in active foreclosure, Patricia continued. Missed payments for 8 months. His kids were withdrawn from private school in September for non-payment. He has $340,000 in total debt across credit cards, personal loans, and business obligations. The timeline was devastating. Business collapse, account access, 18 months of withdrawals totaling $47,000 while his entire life fell apart. He hadn't been fighting me for principles. He'd been fighting for survival. And he'd funded that fight by stealing from our incapacitated parents. What they don't tell you about family betrayal is that understanding the desperation behind it doesn't make you angrier. It makes you feel nothing, which is worse. The judge was not amused. Filing a lawsuit with fabricated evidence is not a legal strategy, Mr. Mitchell. It's fraud. My brother, 52 and wearing a suit that had fit him better 6 months ago, stood before the bench without a lawyer, because he couldn't afford one, because everything he'd built with our parents' money had completely collapsed. The court sanctions you for filing a frivolous lawsuit with forged documents, the judge continued. You are ordered to pay Ms. Wheeler's legal fees in the amount of $18,000. My brother went pale, because everyone in that courtroom knew he didn't have $18,000. He didn't have $1,800. I watched him shrink. The confident swagger he'd carried through the guardianship hearing was gone. Just a man, watching his con crumble in real time. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just the flat recognition that this is what desperation looks like when it runs out of options. My father died on a Tuesday. Massive stroke. The kind that doesn't give you time to prepare or say things you should have said 28 years ago. I was holding his hand when it happened. One moment he was breathing, the next he wasn't. He was 79. I was 56. We had run out of time for him to explain why he gave my brother $800,000 over 3 decades while giving me nothing. Some conversations don't happen. That's not tragedy. That's just math. The funeral was small, my 3 adult children, a handful of family friends who'd known my parents before the dementia, and the stealing and the lawsuits made everything complicated. 7 members from my support group for adult children managing elder care alone. My brother didn't come. He sent a text. Can't afford travel. You've made it clear I'm not welcome. I read it twice. The first sentence was true. The second was him rewriting history one more time, making himself the victim of my cruelty instead of the architect of his own consequences. I didn't respond. My mother sat in the front row in her wheelchair, wearing the blue dress I'd picked out, because blue was Dad's favorite color. She kept asking when we were going home. Her dementia was deep enough that she didn't understand her husband was in the casket 10 feet away. Soon, Mom, I said, we're going home soon. At the reception in the church basement, my oldest daughter, Sarah, 32 and too observant for comfort, pulled me aside. You seem really distant, she said. Even now, like you've turned off your feelings completely. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she was right. I'd spent 2 years fighting. Guardianship hearings, lawsuits, cease and desist letters, proving I wasn't stealing from my parents while my brother actively stole from them, building boundaries, enforcing consequences, winning, and somewhere in all that winning, I'd forgotten how to be soft. I don't know how to turn them back on, I said. Some victories cost more than losing. That's not a paradox. That's just truth. That evening I visited my mother at the memory care facility. She was in her room staring at a photo album she couldn't process anymore. Hi, Mom. She looked up. For a moment, nothing. Just the blank confusion that had defined the last 2 years. Then something flickered. Her eyes focused. On me. Actually, on me. Carla? Her voice was uncertain, like she was testing whether the name still fit. Yeah, Mom, it's me. Her eyes filled with tears. Actual tears. She struggled to form words, her mouth moving around sounds that wouldn't quite come together. Both my children. I tried to protect. The words tangled. You were always strong. She was trying to apologize. I could feel it. But the dementia held most of the words. Hostage. I was wrong, she said, clear. Definite. Then her face creased with confusion as she tried to articulate what about or why, but the clarity was already slipping. It's okay, Mom. No. Her hand gripped mine, surprisingly strong. Wrong. Then it was gone. The moment passed, her eyes unfocused. When are we going home? I sat with her for another hour, but she didn't recognize me again. I'd waited 28 years for my mother to see me, to acknowledge that she'd chosen my brother over me again and again, that she'd asked at my wedding if I minded them helping him since I'd married well, and then held me to that reluctant yes for 3 decades. I'd gotten 12 words. Fragmentary, incomplete. Possibly just confused memory fragments without real comprehension. Some apologies arrived too late to heal the wound. They just proved the wound was always there. Driving home that night, I thought about invisible daughters. About the cycle that went back generations. My mother favored my brother the way her mother probably favored someone else. Wounds passed down like family china. She'd been wrong. She'd said it. But she'd also created a daughter so desperate for approval that I spent 56 years trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. Breaking that cycle would require conscious choice. Different parenting, different priorities, different values. The damage to my own children was already done. Sarah had just told me I seemed emotionally distant during my father's funeral. That's not something you undo. That's something you acknowledge and try to repair. But maybe repair is enough. Maybe you don't have to fix everything perfectly. Maybe you just have to stop repeating the pattern. I'd spent decades being the invisible daughter. Now I was the defended mother. Neither version was quite right, but somewhere between those two women was someone who could be both strong and soft, who could protect herself without destroying her capacity for vulnerability. I didn't know how to become her yet, but understanding the problem was the first step toward solving it. Some cycles break slowly, one choice at a time. My brother called 3 months after our mother died to ask about his inheritance. Not, "I'm sorry for your loss," not, "How are you holding up?" Not even basic human decency, pretending he cared about the woman who'd spent 77 years favoring him. Just, "What's left and when do I get it?" My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old, and I've spent the last 2 years becoming someone I barely recognize, someone who doesn't flinch when family shows exactly who they are. I sent him the documentation, every dollar accounted for, the house fully claimed by the reverse mortgage lender, zero equity remaining. The $11,000 in savings spent entirely on final care costs. The $8,000 in medical bills and funeral expenses that I paid myself because someone had to, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be him. "There's nothing to inherit," I wrote. Professional, factual. The way you'd inform a stranger about a closed account. He accused me of hiding money, threatened to challenge the estate, said I'd stolen what was rightfully his. After $800,000 over 28 years. After withdrawing $47,000 while Mom's dementia made her vulnerable. After visiting twice in 2 years, while I paid $13,500 monthly for their care. My attorney sent certified accounting documentation showing our parents died with no assets, and I'd covered the final debts from my own funds. Complete paper trail. Notarized statements. Bank records going back 5 years. Derek never contacted me again. And I felt absolutely nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not relief. Just the same flat acknowledgement I'd give to hearing the weather forecast. He existed somewhere doing whatever he was doing, and it had zero relevance to my life. 2 years earlier, when Dad first had his stroke, I'd been 54 years old, working part-time bookkeeping for $32,000 annually. I'd spent 3 decades making myself small and agreeable and invisible. 2 years of crisis changed that. The financial firm that hired me during the guardianship battle promoted me to senior analyst, $115,000 annually. My supervisor said I'd saved them $200,000 in budget inefficiencies my first month, and they wanted to keep me incentivized. I smiled and negotiated for more before accepting, because apparently I'd become someone who did that now. I wrote articles about elder care financial planning. Regional outlets picked them up. A podcast about family dynamics interviewed me about sibling inequality in caregiving. My professional reputation grew steadily through methodical competence and zero tolerance for bullshit. The support group I'd started in a church basement with 6 terrified women grew to 23 regular members meeting weekly. We partnered with the Senior Center to offer workshops on elder care planning and financial protection for aging parents. 40 people showed up to the first session. 40 invisible daughters and sons who'd been doing everything alone while entitled siblings did nothing. I was good at this. Building systems, creating resources, helping people see that documentation and boundaries weren't cruelty, they were survival. But even in the middle of building this new life, my therapist asked me a question that stopped me cold. "When's the last time you actually cried about your parents?" I'd been sitting in her office talking about the support group expansion and mentoring women at work and the speaking engagement next month, rattling off accomplishments like evidence in court, proving I'd won. "I don't have time to cry," I said. "There's too much to do. You've been in fight mode for 2 years. She leaned forward slightly. "You haven't let yourself grieve because grief feels like weakness and you can't afford to be weak right now. But Carla, they're gone. The battle's over, and you never let yourself feel what it cost you." I wanted to argue, to list everything I'd accomplished despite them, because of them, in defiance of them. But she was right. I'd spent 2 years winning battles and 0 hours acknowledging that I'd lost my parents without ever having parents who truly saw me. That I'd sacrificed everything trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. That I was 56 years old and finally successful and completely hollow. That realization didn't fix anything. It just meant I had to start doing the harder work of actually processing the grief instead of weaponizing it. Mom died peacefully in her sleep 3 months after Dad. I handled the arrangements alone, picked the casket, wrote the obituary, stood at the funeral with 17 people in attendance while Derek showed up 20 minutes late and left during the reception. I'd started writing a guide for adult children navigating elder care without family support, processing my own experience through helping others, turning the pain into something useful because I didn't know how else to hold it. When Derek's inheritance call came and I sent him the documentation, my attorney's response was beautiful in its precision. Your sister covered $8,000 in final debts from personal funds. The estate has no assets. This matter is closed. Derek's threats evaporated when confronted with actual accounting. Funny how that works. 6 months after Mom's death, my guide was published by a small press specializing in family and caregiving issues. It sold modestly but steadily, mostly to women who'd sacrificed careers for family and now faced elder care alone while siblings disappeared. I did a small regional book tour, libraries and community centers and senior facilities. Met dozens of people with nearly identical stories. The details changed, but the pattern was always the same. Invisible daughters and entitled sons, parents who couldn't see past favoritism to recognize the child who showed up. At a library in a town 40 minutes from mine, a woman in her early 50s approached me after my talk. She'd been crying through most of it. I thought I was crazy, she said. For 30 years, I thought I was selfish for wanting them to see me, for being hurt that they gave my brother everything while I got nothing. Reading your book made me feel seen for the first time in my life. Seen? That's what she said. And I understood with devastating clarity that being seen was exactly what I'd been chasing from my parents for 40 years. Not money, not fairness, just acknowledgement that I existed and mattered and was worth showing up for. I never got it. Mom's one fragmentary moment of clarity 3 months before death, struggling to say I was always strong, didn't count. Because I'd never know if she actually saw me or if it was just confused neurons firing random memories. But this woman saw me. The support group members saw me. My publisher and employer and the 40 people who'd shown up to the workshop saw me. I'd been looking for validation in the wrong place for 4 decades. My kids started showing up differently too. My oldest daughter asked me to speak to her professional networking group about rebuilding careers after caregiving breaks. Actually wanted my input and presence, not just obligation calls. My son began visiting monthly. Real conversations instead of surface pleasantries, where we both pretended we knew each other. My younger daughter asked me to attend a therapy session with her to discuss family dynamics. I sat on that therapist's couch and heard my daughter describe growing up feeling invisible while I was consumed with being invisible to my own parents. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I failed you because I was too busy chasing approval from people who were never going to give it. I'm committed to doing better. She nodded, said she appreciated that, said it would take time. I had time now. No parents to manage, no brother to fight. Just the work of rebuilding what I'd broken while breaking myself for people who didn't see the damage. The support group grew to multiple locations. The senior center named their elder care resource program after me. I started mentoring younger women at my firm who'd taken career breaks, showing them that managing household finances and family logistics translates to professional financial skills, because it's the exact same competence just without the paycheck and resume line. My company was acquired by a larger firm during my second year there. During the transition, I negotiated a retention package and was offered financial director at $145,000 annually. I accepted without hesitation. Because at 56, I'd finally learned that my worth wasn't measured by people who couldn't see it. It was measured by the life I built, despite them. Last Tuesday, I drove past Derek's old house on my way to a client meeting. New owners had painted it cheerful yellow and planted flowers in the beds that used to be weeds. The foreclosure had happened 8 months ago, according to public records I'd stopped checking but occasionally noticed. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just neutral acknowledgement that people face consequences for their choices, and I'd finally stopped trying to protect him from his. He'd built his life on money he didn't earn and lies he couldn't sustain. It collapsed exactly the way structures built on nothing always collapse. I'd built mine on competence and boundaries and refusing to be diminished. Only one of those architectures survives long term. That's not revenge. That's just math. 214 people showed up to hear me talk about how my family stole from me for 28 years. Not the phrasing on the conference program. That said, financial abuse by family members and the psychological toll of sibling abandonment during caregiving. Professional. Acceptable. The kind of title that gets approved by review committees. But that's what I was talking about. Theft, erasure, the systematic destruction of a daughter who said yes once at 28 and spent 3 decades paying for it. I stood at the podium in a hotel conference room in downtown Portland, looking out at rows of faces I didn't know. My name is Carla Wheeler. I'm 56 years old. 2 years ago, I was paying my dead mother's final medical bills with money I didn't have. Last month, I got promoted to financial director at $145,000 annually. And today, I was standing in front of 200 strangers explaining how invisible daughters become visible. The presentation took 40 minutes. I showed the numbers 800,000 to my brother over 28 years, while I received exactly nothing. I showed the pattern. Every time I said yes to just this once, it became permission for the next transfer. I showed the ending, both parents dead, $34,000 in care costs I paid myself, 0 inheritance, one brother who disappeared the second he confirmed there was no money left. But the numbers weren't the point. The point was the moment you realize you've been complicit in your own erasure, the moment you understand that some people will take everything you give and still demand more, the moment you decide to stop saying yes. When I finished, the room was quiet for 3 seconds that felt like an hour. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then all of them, standing, 214 people on their feet. I wasn't expecting that. Afterward, 17 different women approached me with variations of the same story. Same invisible daughter, same entitled sibling. Same parents who couldn't see past their own patterns to recognize what they were doing. One woman had paid $67,000 toward her father's care, while her sister got the inheritance. Another had spent 6 years managing her mother's dementia, while her brother posted social media tributes about what an amazing son he was. Every single one thought she was alone until she heard my presentation. I genuinely believed I was the only person this had happened to, one woman said. She was maybe 40, dressed in a gray business suit, and she was crying. I thought I was crazy for being angry about it. You're not crazy, I told her, and you're not alone. That's when the literary agent found me. I'd like to talk to you about a second book, she said. Trim woman in her early 50s, expensive glasses, the kind of direct eye contact that meant she'd already decided and was just being polite by asking. Your first one sold well, but this, the generational cycles, the psychology of family dysfunction, the roadmap for breaking the pattern, this is bigger. I agreed. Because 2 years ago, I would have said no out of habit. But I've learned that visibility isn't punishment, it's oxygen. The support group network I'd started had grown to 37 active members across 4 locations: Portland, Seattle, Sacramento, and Phoenix. Women who'd spent decades being invisible. Women learning to say no. Women discovering that competence without recognition is just unpaid labor with a family label. The senior center where I volunteered had used the resources I developed to help over 100 families with elder care planning. Actual tools, actual boundaries, actual documentation of who does the work versus who gets the credit. My professional life had stabilized. Clear boundaries, genuine respect from colleagues, the kind of career I could have built 30 years ago if I hadn't made myself small to fit other people's expectations. I'd built something real from the wreckage of my family. My brother, I'd learned through extended family members who occasionally reached out, was working retail management somewhere in Ohio. His kids were in public school. He was rebuilding on a much smaller scale than the empire he'd planned. I felt nothing about this. Not satisfaction, not sympathy, just the recognition that consequences are consequences, and his were not my responsibility to fix. My 3 children had become more present. My oldest daughter, who told me at 54 that I always seemed distracted, was planning a wedding and actually wanted my input. Not just attendance, actual involvement. My son called weekly now with real conversations where he asked about my life, not just updates about his. My younger daughter had started joining me for monthly dinners where we talked honestly about family patterns and how to not repeat them. I knew I'd lost years I'd never get back. My parents died without truly seeing me. That wound would never fully heal, but I stopped waiting for them to see my worth and started living as though I already knew it. On a Tuesday evening 6 weeks after the conference, I hosted the support group in the community room of my apartment building. 12 women showed up. The usual mix of new members terrified of setting boundaries and veterans who'd already cut contact with toxic families and were learning to live without guilt. A new member named Jennifer sat in the corner chair, looking exactly like I had 2 years ago. Mid-40s. Professional clothes slightly rumpled from a long day. Eyes that said she was barely holding it together. My brother got $400,000 from our parents over 20 years. She said, when it was her turn to share, I got asked to contribute to their care costs. When I said I couldn't afford it, my mother told me I should have planned better. The invisible daughter, the entitled sibling, the parents who couldn't see past their own trauma to recognize what they were doing. I'd heard this story 37 times in 37 different versions. What happened when you tried to talk to them about it? I asked. They said I was being selfish. Jennifer's voice cracked. They said my brother needed help and I was successful enough to manage on my own. Like, being competent meant I didn't deserve support. Competence as punishment. I knew that pattern intimately. Here's what I learned, I said. Some people will frame your strength as evidence you don't need love. They'll use your capability as justification for taking everything. And they'll call you selfish when you finally say no. Jennifer nodded, tears running down her face. But here's the other thing, I continued. You're not obligated to keep protecting people from the consequences of their choices. You're not required to fund other people's lives while yours falls apart. And you're definitely not selfish for recognizing theft and calling it what it is. After the meeting, I drove home to my apartment. 1 bedroom, comfortable. The walls displayed my professional awards, recent photos with my children, and my published book with my name on the cover, Invisible Daughters, Breaking the Cycle of Family Financial Abuse by Carla Wheeler. I made tea and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who said yes to everything, who made herself small, who chased approval from people incapable of giving it. And I thought about who I'd become, someone who finally said no and built a life through her own competence. My phone showed a message from my publisher. Preliminary interest numbers for the second book were strong. My calendar showed lunch with my daughter tomorrow and a speaking engagement next week. The support group had 2 new members starting next month. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. Breaking Cycles, How Invisible Daughters Stop the Pattern. Chapter 1. I started typing. Transformation is not a single moment. It's a choice made every day to refuse being diminished. Invisible daughters spend years chasing recognition from people who never intended to give it. We make ourselves smaller. We say yes when we mean no. We call it keeping the peace. We call it being reasonable. We call it family. But there comes a moment when you realize that being invisible isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. That being reasonable means accepting unreasonable treatment. That family is supposed to mean people who see you, not people you're required to serve. This book is for the daughters who were told their competence meant they didn't need love. For the ones who paid the bills while siblings got the inheritance. For the women who managed the crises alone while everyone else claimed credit. This is about how we become visible. Not through the approval of people who couldn't see us, but through building lives that cannot be ignored. The words came faster than I expected. 2 years of transformation distilled into paragraphs. Dozens of support group conversations turned into roadmaps. My own wreckage rebuilt into something that could help other women escape theirs. I wrote about the best revenge being not destruction, but construction. Not tearing others down, but building. Something that outlasts the pain. I wrote about stopping the cycle with my own children. About learning to be present instead of perfect. About choosing relationships that require actual showing up instead of just showing off. I wrote about Jennifer and the 36 other women who'd found their voices through recognizing they weren't alone. As I wrote, I understood something I couldn't have articulated 2 years ago when I was still fighting my brother's lawsuits and paying my mother's medical bills and trying to prove I deserved to exist. I'd stopped waiting. I'd stopped performing. I'd stopped measuring my worth by people who never valued it. The wound would never fully heal, but I'd learned to build around it, to let it inform my work without defining my worth. I'd helped dozens of women do the same. That was legacy. That was victory. That was enough.